All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we're taking a deep dive into something pretty intense.
Buckle up, right?
Exactly. We're going to be looking at a first-hand account of a high school lockdown.
Always a tough topic, but important.
Absolutely. We're going to be exploring an excerpt from The Chamber, a lockdown survival story. And let me tell you, this one's a real page-turner. Like, remember all those lockdown drills we had back in school?
Oh, yeah.
Well, this is like that, but a million times more real and scary.
The interesting thing about this account is that it doesn't just give us the facts of what happened. You really get inside the head of the narrator, you know? You feel the panic, the uncertainty, those split-second decisions.
Yeah, you're right there in the moment with them. So, to set the scene, imagine a pretty typical high school. 3 floors, classrooms, the whole 9 yards.
Standard setup.
But then there are these basement classrooms, kind of tucked away and isolated.
Yeah.
And for some reason, everyone calls this area the chamber.
Oh, that's creepy. It's just the name alone sends chills down my spine.
I know, right? It adds this whole other layer of eeriness to the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where our narrator and his friend JJ are when the lockdown announcement comes over the intercom.
So they're already kind of separated from the rest of the school.
Exactly. But here's the thing, and maybe you can relate to this from your own high school days. They don't take it seriously at first.
Classic.
They're just like, oh, cool, a free period. That teenage invincibility.
It's not that teenagers are stupid, it's just that their brains are still developing, you know? They don't always have that same risk assessment ability that adults do.
That's a good point. They haven't lived long enough to experience real danger.
Exactly.
So they're kind of wandering around the school thinking they have the place to themselves. They even head upstairs to explore.
Bold move.
Yeah, and that's when things take a turn. They're walking down a hallway, and they spot this man lurking in the shadows.
Ooh, that's not good.
Definitely not a teacher, definitely doesn't belong there. The narrator describes him as looking disheveled, kind of like someone who's homeless.
That visual detail is so important, right? Because it instantly shifts the mood. It goes from carefree to, wait a minute, something is really wrong here.
It's that gut feeling, that primal instinct that something's not right.
And that's when the teenage nonchalance just vanishes.
Poof, gone.
Yeah.
They turn and run back down to the basement, but their classrooms are locked.
So now they're trapped.
Exactly. Panic sets in. Their only option is to hide in the bathroom.
The bathroom. Talk about a symbol of vulnerability.
Right. I mean, you think of a bathroom as a place of privacy, routine, but in this situation, it becomes their sanctuary, their last line of defense.
But it's also a small, enclosed space, which just amplifies that feeling of being trapped.
No escape. So they're huddled in the darkness, barely breathing, and then they hear it, the doorknob turning.
Oh, no.
The intruder is inside the bathroom.
This is where I'd be losing it.
I know, right? It's a heart-stopping moment. And it makes you think, how often do things like this happen? We hear about the tragedies, but how many close calls go unreported?
It makes you wonder, do we even have a clear picture of how widespread this problem is?
That's a good question. But back to our story. Our narrator and his friend know they're in a life-or-death situation.
Yeah.
So they crawl under the stall partitions, whispering a desperate plan.
Talk about thinking on your feet.
It's amazing what the human brain can do under pressure, right?
Pure survival instincts kicking in.
And they make it out. They burst out of that bathroom and sprint to JJ's classroom, banging on the door until the teacher lets them in.
Thank goodness.
Safe for now. But then JJ drops a bombshell. He saw a gun in the man's pocket.
Whoa. Okay, so now the stakes are even higher.
The threat level just went way up.
Yeah.
And just as they're processing this, they hear a bang on the classroom door.
No way.
The man is outside, rattling the doorknob, trying to get in.
You can practically feel the tension in that classroom, can't you?
It's like the walls are closing in. And that's where we'll leave it for now, but we'll be back to unpack the rest of this harrowing story.
It's just that feeling of being trapped. Like prey, you know?
Totally. And it raises so many questions, like, are schools really prepared for these situations? I mean, we have the drills, the security cameras, all that, but is that enough?
Right. It's a complex issue, isn't it? I mean, some people argue that we need even stricter security measures. Like metal detectors, armed guards, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, that's one side of the argument. But then others say, well, that's just a Band-Aid solution. We need to focus on prevention, address things like mental health, bullying, create a culture where kids feel safe speaking up if they see something wrong.
Yeah, that's the root of it.
It makes you think about the role of the media, too. Like in this story, there's no mention of news coverage of the lockdown. It's like it happened, but nobody outside the school even knows about it.
That's got to be tough for the students involved, right?
Sure, sure. It's like
Yes.
their experience is being minimized, almost like it didn't even happen.
And that can make it really hard to process the trauma.
So they're dealing with the immediate fear, the adrenaline, but then there's this whole other layer of isolation.
It's like they're going through something that nobody else understands.
Exactly. And that can have long-term psychological effects.
Oh, absolutely. Trauma manifests in so many different ways. Some people might have flashbacks, nightmares, anxiety. Others might become withdrawn, super vigilant, have trouble sleeping. There's no one-size-fits-all response.
In this story, the narrator is convinced that the intruder was there to hurt someone. He didn't see a weapon, but the possibility, combined with the man's behavior, really messed with his head.
It's interesting, right? Because it makes you think about how our minds try to make sense of trauma.
Yeah, we create these narratives to explain what happened, even if they aren't entirely accurate.
It's like a way to regain a sense of control after something that felt so chaotic and out of control.
And sometimes those narratives can stick with us for a long time,
They become these deep-seated beliefs that can shape the way we see the world.
which is why it's so important to get help.
Yeah.
Therapy, support groups, things like that can help people process trauma in a healthy way.
And it's not just about individual healing, right? It's also about creating a supportive community.
Exactly. Schools, families, communities, everyone has a role to play in helping people feel safe and supported after something like this.
It's about understanding that trauma doesn't just affect the person who went through it. It ripples outwards, it affects everyone around them.
Okay, so back to our story. The lockdown eventually ends. The police arrive, but the intruder is gone.
Of course.
The school beefs up security, adds more cameras, but there's still this lingering sense of unease.
I bet, even though they're physically safe now, the experience has changed them.
It makes you think, what would you do in a situation like that? Would you have been so chill at the beginning?
Probably not.
Would you have thought to hide in the bathroom?
I don't know. It's hard to say.
It's a good exercise, though, right? It forces us to think about how we'd react in a crisis.
Definitely. And it highlights the importance of being prepared, both mentally and practically.
Knowing the procedures, trusting your gut, having some kind of plan, even if it's just a mental one.
Because those split-second decisions can be the difference between life and death.
So true. Okay, so we're coming up on the end of our deep dive, but there's one last thing I want to talk about. The narrator ends his account with this chilling statement. I'm convinced that man was there to kill someone. Wow. And that statement just hangs there. It speaks volumes about the power of trauma.
It's like even though the event is over, the fear and the uncertainty linger on.
And it makes you question, what is truth, really?
Yeah.
Is it the objective facts, or is it the subjective experience of the person who went through it?
It's a tough one, isn't it? In trauma, those two things can be very different.
And that's something we'll explore further in the final part of our deep dive. We're back, and, we've been talking about this high school lockdown.
That's right, a first-hand account from the chamber.
Yeah, and I keep thinking about that last line from the narrator. I'm convinced that man was there to kill someone. Chillin', right?
It is, and I think it speaks to the profound impact that trauma can have, even years after the event. It's not just the physical experience, but those deep psychological and emotional scars that can linger.
It's like, in this case, the narrator is so certain that the intruder meant to harm someone, that he was there to kill. He didn't even see a weapon, but just the thought of it, mixed with the guy's behavior, just solidified that fear in his mind.
And it raises these really interesting questions about truth, doesn't it? What is truth? Is it like the actual events as they happened, or is it the way the person who lived through it experienced it?
Yeah, like even if, hypothetically, the guy didn't have a weapon and didn't actually want to hurt anyone, the narrator's experience, the fear, those split-second decisions, those are all very real.
Of course, those are his truth, and it's important to validate that. Trauma isn't always logical, It's about how our brains process these intense, overwhelming events. And sometimes our minds create stories, almost without us realizing it, to help us make sense of the chaos.
Like a way to regain a sense of control, to make meaning out of something that feels so random and terrifying.
Exactly. But the thing is, those stories, those beliefs we develop after trauma, they can be limiting, even debilitating sometimes.
They can hold us back, color our view of the world.
Absolutely. And that's where the need for support comes in. Therapy, support groups, these can provide tools to process trauma in a healthier way, to, challenge those negative beliefs and regain a sense of control and empowerment.
It's not just about individual healing either, is it? I mean, this story makes me think about the impact on the whole community.
Right. It raises questions about how schools and families can better support students after an event like this, how to create a space where it's okay to talk about what happened, to be vulnerable without judgment.
We need to create that sense of safety and support,
Yeah.
for everyone involved, because trauma affects more than just the person who directly experienced it. It ripples outward, touches everyone around them. Okay, so to kind of wrap up this story, the lockdown ends, the police show up, but the intruder is gone.
Force.
The school does what it can, tightens security, adds more cameras, but that feeling of unease, that probably lingers.
I'm sure it does. They might be physically safe, but the experience has definitely left its mark.
And this whole deep dive, it's been a journey. We've gone from those tense moments of hiding in the bathroom to these bigger questions about trauma and its lasting effects. And it's clear that, this story may be over, but the conversation about school safety, about trauma and resilience, that needs to continue.
Absolutely. We have to keep talking about these issues because, as we've seen, these situations are real, they can happen anywhere, and their impact is profound.
But by sharing these stories, talking openly about the challenges and, even the triumphs, we can start to create a world where schools are truly safe spaces for learning and growing. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive. I hope it's given you some things to think about and maybe even inspired you to be a part of creating a safer, more supportive world for everyone.
We all have a role to play. Thanks for listening.